Hey guys, it's the Ring System, and today we're here to talk to you about the diversity of system experience outside of a DID diagnosis. What that means for this video is we're going to be going down some experiences of systemhood outside of DID, so we're going to be looking at different types of OSDD, some of which we haven't talked about on this channel before, and then secondly, we're going to be looking at how the experience of being a system is much more messy than the carefully constructed boxes by the DSM, and how a variety of life experiences can lead to systems having an interesting relationship with the DSM diagnostic categories. Okay, so let's move into it. I know on this channel we've talked a little bit about DID, a little bit about OSDD-1A, and a lot about OSDD-1B, but to give people a little bit of context, let's review them. DID, as we've talked about before, has 5 diagnostic criteria, and I'm going to summarize them for you real quickly, so these aren't going to be exact quotes. Criterion A is that you have fully differentiated alters. It describes alters as having a sense of self and a sense of agency, specifically correlated with an alter, accompanied by differences in behavior, consciousness, memory, perception, cognition, sensory or motor functioning. That's a whole bunch of fancy words for fully differentiated alters. Criterion B is that you have recurrent amnesia gaps in your day-to-day life. And secondly, that these amnesia gaps are inconsistent with ordinary forgetting. Criterion C says that these symptoms must cause significant distress in your daily functioning. And criteria D and E are kind of exceptions, so we're not pathologizing something that's not actually DID. Criterion D is that this disturbance is not due to a broadly accepted cultural or religious practice, such as indigenous cultures that experience healthy forms of multiplicity, or something like childhood imaginary friends. And criterion E says these disturbances are not due to substance use or another medical condition. Basically, that's DID as we know it. It's the most well-known and understood form of systemhood. You have alters, when you switch, you have amnesia, and then it causes significant distress in your daily life. However, some people who exhibit DID symptoms don't match all of these criteria, which is where we get OSDD-1, which is Other Specified Dissociative Disorder Type 1. The key thing to understand about the OSDD subtype is that this is a catch-all category for anyone who doesn't fit the criteria for any dissociative disorders. So OSDD-1 are people who exhibit DID symptoms but don't fit the DID diagnostic criteria. OSDD-2, 3, and 4, which we're not going to mention further, are people who don't fit the criteria for other dissociative disorders that don't result in alters. And then furthermore, because this is a catch-all category, there's not individual diagnostic codes for each example given. OSDD is just diagnosed as OSDD, whether you have 1, 2, 3, or 4, whether you have alters or not. Which in our opinion, we believe that should be changed, but that's something to unpack in an entirely different video. So, when we are considering OSDD-1, so the category of systems that don't fully meet the criteria for DID, OSDD-1A and OSDD-1B are the two most common presentations of OSDD-1, and you'll hear about them a lot. OSDD-1A occurs when people don't meet the first criteria of DID, which is fully differentiated alters. That means in OSDD-1A, people have systems without fully differentiated alters. But as Paul Dell brings up in numerous essays that he's written, there is not really a concrete definition for what fully differentiated means. So when it comes to actually diagnosing OSDD, if someone doesn't meet the criteria for DID, it's really up to the clinician of whether the individual presents with OSDD-1A and doesn't have fully differentiated alters, or whether they have DID. So to try to extrapolate on that a little bit, I can give you a couple examples that have been postulated over time about what less fully differentiated alters looks like. The most commonly referenced example is that all alters are versions of the same person. They might be the same person at different ages. They might all have the same name. One might be a work self, and one might be a home self, and one might be an emotional self, and they feel conflicted when other alters have different wants and needs than they do. Secondly, another example is not having differentiated self-histories. What that means for us, because we have fully differentiated alters, is that when I'm fronting as Silver and I do something, I recognize it as, oh, I'm Silver, I did that. And when Mia fronts and does something, Mia will front and I'll be like, oh yeah, Mia did that. But with some cases of OSDD-1A, that different self-history is not present, which means that each alter thinks that everything that happened in their memory is something they did, which can generate a lot of internal conflict as you have 3 different people in a body thinking that all the memories are theirs. Obviously, OSDD-1B and DID systems might experience this to some level, especially during the figuring it out process, but it's not nearly to the same degree as OSDD-1A systems might. Secondly, let's talk about OSDD-1B, which we've talked a lot about on this channel before. But in essence, OSDD systems don't meet the second criteria for DID, which is recurrent amnesia that is inconsistent with ordinary forgetting. This means that OSDD systems have partial to no amnesia when they switch. What this means is an alter will have access to all of the memories of the system. So if Mia fronts and then I front, I will know everything that Mia did, and I will not have any amnesia for it. I might experience partial amnesia, which is feeling like I didn't do that, that wasn't me that did that, I don't have any emotional connection to those memories, but I still remember the entire content of what happened. We have a lot more videos going into this concept, such as our video on emotional amnesia, which I will put up here and in the description to check out if you'd like. Also, this doesn't mean that DID systems always experience amnesia when they switch. Some DID systems only experience amnesia maybe once a month, couple times a year, but the point is that it's regular and that it happens. In OSDD systems, they don't meet the criteria at all, means they don't have any full amnesia and no full blackouts. Moving on from OSDD-1A and OSDD-1B, some systems don't meet the criteria for both the first and second criteria of DID. This means they don't have fully distinct alters and they don't have amnesia. So these are systems that embody both of OSDD-1A and OSDD-1B, and they simply have the label of OSDD-1 as an overall category. And then finally, there's other presentations of OSDD-1 that aren't covered by OSDD-1A or OSDD-1B. For example, in the revised version of the DSM-3, their example case for OSDD was non-switching systems. Specifically, a quote from that was cases in which a second personality never assumes complete executive control. Non-switching OSDD systems experience their systemhood mostly through passive influence and internal communication. Passive influence is when an alter who's not fronting will exert their influence on an alter who's in the front and interacting with the external world. And internal communication is when multiple alters internally will communicate with each other. We have videos on these topics in much more depth as well, which are going to be up here and in the description. And then beyond these 4 examples I've given of OSDD-1 systems, there's other presentations that I probably haven't stumbled across in all of my readings of literature. The diversity of systemhood is vast and large, and I'm sure there's experiences out there that I'm not aware of, and those experiences are completely valid in and of themselves. And if I find anything else as I keep going, I will add it in the description after this video is posted, so you can always check there. But even if we haven't added anything, I'm sure OSDD systems exist that don't fit what we have just described, because systemhood is diverse. And then to transition to the second part of this video, in all of the diversity of system experiences, systems have a lot of messy experiences with diagnosis and psychotherapy. And the best way I can explain this to you is by talking about some examples of experiences that might not align perfectly with the diagnoses that I just talked about. So our first example are systems that might have been diagnosed with older versions of DID or OSDD. They might have been diagnosed with multiple personality disorder or DDNOS, which is dissociative disorder not otherwise specified, the old version of OSDD in the DSM-4. Systems with these diagnoses might have a whole bunch of reasons for not updating to the newest version of diagnoses in the DSM-5. Some of these reasons could be that they don't have the financial means to get re-diagnosed. Systems might have moved away from their therapist or psychiatrist and don't have access to a specialist in dissociative disorders anymore. Systems may simply not want to go through the effort of updating their diagnosis to the DSM-5 version, or because the actual diagnostic criteria have changed slightly over time, systems might not fit the updated criteria of DID or OSDD. A second example of systems falling outside DID and OSDD is simply that there's a whole bunch of systems that are unsure and aren't diagnosed yet. It took us 3 to 4 years to get diagnosed, and before we were diagnosed, we obviously didn't have a diagnosis of OSDD then, so we were in an area of uncertainty. Systems like us might not have a diagnosis or might be in the process of getting a diagnosis, but still know that they are a system. They just don't know whether it's DID or OSDD. Some systems might be working professionally with a therapist or a psychiatrist and are just too early in the discovery process to know whether they're DID or OSDD. They might not know enough about their amnesia or enough about their systemhood or enough about their differentiation to really know which diagnosis fits them best. Other systems might simply be okay with not knowing whether they're DID or OSDD because the issue with OSDD-1B experiencing no amnesia at all is that at any point you could experience amnesia or discover you have amnesia and realize, oh wait, I have DID and not OSDD, and I meet that criteria for amnesia. Systems who are okay with not knowing simply say, I'm a system and I don't need to know the specifics around whether I experience amnesia to fully heal as part of my healing journey. I will deal with it as it comes up, if it comes up, but I don't need to strictly define that for myself. For another example of systems existing out of DID and OSDD, systems might be misdiagnosed with another disorder and aren't pursuing a rediagnosis to a correct disorder. This might be similar to folks diagnosed with NPD or DDNOS, that they don't have financial resources to get re-diagnosed correctly and are still receiving proper care from their therapist who recognizes their correct diagnosis. Or there might be a system who has been misdiagnosed and has gone through a whole bunch of difficult journey in getting correctly diagnosed and never really gotten there, and has just gotten to a point where they've recognized to themselves that they don't need a correct diagnosis to fully heal and recover from trauma with a therapist if that's an option for them. And then furthermore, some systems might purposefully have a misdiagnosis on their record to protect themselves. Diagnoses of DID and OSDD on paper come with a lot of danger. They come with a lot of stigma, and because they're on paper, they can be discoverable in some cases. Having a diagnosis of DID or OSDD has the possibility of interfering with healthcare in the future, interfering with adoption, and interfering with just things that are unknowable. This was an option presented to us by the first specialist we ever saw. She outright sat us down, had a serious conversation, and said, look, I treat people with DID and BPD. Patients with those diagnoses are sometimes discriminated against in medical care. So if you don't have a need for those specific diagnoses in terms of validation or medication, I can present you the option of diagnosing you with depression and continuing your treatment as a DID system in private. So you don't have to bear the stigma and the weight of the consequences that come with that diagnosis. And this is a real fear that has really and heavily impacted the lives of some people with DID and OSDD. And for these safety reasons, some systems might not be on paper diagnosed with DID and OSDD. They might be diagnosed with another disorder for safety and are professionally recognized, just not on paper, as DID and OSDD. I can also put some research paper that talks about the violence people with highly stigmatized disorders face in healthcare down in the description as well. Another group of folks that don't fit diagnostic labels perfectly are people who reject those very medical labels, especially for systems with medical trauma. The labels of DID and OSDD and medicalized terms that have been used in settings to hurt them can be incredibly triggering and traumatizing to some folks, and they might choose to reject these labels and use more neutral and community terms such as multiple and plural and headmate and system to describe themselves as they work through their medical trauma. Systems who reject medical labels like this may or may not have a diagnosis, but at the end of the day, it's up to them to decide what words are the safest and the most comfortable and the least triggering for them when they talk about their own self-experiences. And finally, our last example of systems outside of the DID and OSDD diagnostic criteria are systems that have healed from trauma and achieved functional and healthy multiplicity. Remember criteria C of DID? You have to have significant distress in your daily life to qualify for a disorder. So for folks who have completely healed from trauma, who have built incredible internal communication and have a healthy system and a healthy life and are living healthily, they no longer meet the criteria for DID. They no longer meet the criteria for a disorder, and they don't have DID or OSDD. Healthy systems don't have a disorder anymore. These systems might keep their diagnostic label of DID or OSDD in solidarity with the DID community, or they might drop it and call themselves more community labels such as plural or multiple or something else. And of course, there's even more diverse system experiences than we've talked about in this one video. The one thing we want you guys to take away from this is that it's so incredibly hard to fit this community within boxes. We are so diverse, and there's so many experiences that systems have that any definition you try to put on our community other than more than one will be impossible to fit. You shouldn't force people into these boxes if they don't fit. You shouldn't assume people are faking if they don't exactly fit DID, OSDD-1A, or OSDD-1B. Both because there's more presentations of OSDD-1 and because there's people who exist outside of those diagnostic criteria as systems. We are an incredibly diverse community, and that diversity should be supported and celebrated, not attempted to be forced back into the box that it has already burst open. thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful and informative, and I hope you guys all have an absolutely wonderful day.